Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 podcast. This is kind of an emergency edition of the pod. The Colts have benched starting quarterback Anthony Richardson.
It's an emergency.
Yeah, the Colts have benched starting quarterback Anthony Richardson. They really essentially, where I want to start with this is, you felt like 2023 sort of felt like you had a respite from some of the stuff that happened in 2022, the whiplash of news and stuff like that. And there was some normalcy with Richardson being drafted, then injured, then Gardner Minshew. You kind of knew what was going to happen. That's gone.
Oh, yeah.
All that's gone. Everything that they said in the offseason, the last two off seasons about patience and giving Richardson time to work through it and all of that stuff is essentially out the window because they benched him after 10 starts. Yeah, let's just start there. Whiplash.
Yeah, for a second time in 3 years, we are 8 games into a season where a tough road loss to a divisional team means the quarterback gets benched and the 4-year plan, or in this case, what they hoped was a 15-year plan, gets thrown in the trash. This is going to be a weird podcast where we're sort of, in a way, eating crow for all the takes that we've put out here, often after games about how you can toss out the idea that they were going to move from Anthony Richardson to Joe Flacco whenever Anthony's healthy, which we said because that's what literally everybody in the franchise has said and shown through their moves since even before they drafted him. I know you put out that quote from Jim Irsay at the owners' meetings going into that draft. It's gone back that far. But what we're learning is actions matter more than words. And if we go by what this franchise did literally 2 years ago, we know that long-term plans don't really mean anything. What matters is when you have a tough loss in the middle of the season divisional team, sometimes you throw that plan in the trash, you reassess, and but that was the model that they laid out and wanted to stick to, of playing him no matter what through the struggles. They thought it was valuable for him to learn from struggles and adversity, and this week brought a ton, not only his play, but the situation with the tap out and just the way the national conversation is going, which always kind of affects young quarterbacks. This was the test of that, and ultimately they crumbled under the pressure, and they're doing it. Their messaging is going to be that they're not giving up on Anthony Richardson, that this is their method of trying to sit him down, and we can talk through that. But at the very least, no matter how this goes from here on out, they aborted the plan that they laid out for him, the plan that they came up with when they drafted him. They're admitting that didn't work, and now they're in the stage of guessing and grasping at straws, and they're hoping to get lucky. And maybe they will, but that's what they're banking on. It's no more plan and foresight and process. It's we hope we get lucky with this.
Yeah. I'm figuring out where to start because this thing has tendrils that go in a whole bunch of different directions. I'm trying to figure out where we want to go first. I want to start with just the immediate. Joe Flacco's probably the better quarterback for this team for if you're just looking at it from a 2024 perspective. The numbers are kind of impossible to ignore. 65% to 44%, 7 touchdowns and 1 pick to 4 touchdowns and 7 picks. Flacco has not really thrown the ball downfield all that much. His yards per attempt, I think, are at 6.8, 6.6, somewhere in there. But Anthony Richardson's explosive plays were being wiped out to some degree by just the sheer amount of incompletions. He's down to 7.2 yards per attempt for the season, so that's not as big of a separator as maybe it was earlier in the year. You have the rushing yards. Joe Flacco cannot give this team what Anthony Richardson gave them as a runner at 5.9 yards per carry, 242 rushing yards so far this season. But, the passing offense just your stat the other day that you were saying when we were driving to the George W. Bush Intercontinental Airport. I think it's international, but intercontinental sounds better. It is really telling. You know, it's 1 in 10 completions, right?
Yeah, 1 game with more than 10. That was the Green Bay game.
So, like, I know if you look at the tape that there's drops and some other stuff. I also think that there's stuff that people are probably missing on the tape. I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm going to try to ask Shane Steichen about this tomorrow, but I would bet that some of those contested throws, some of the other mishaps they've had in the passing game come down to Richardson maybe having somewhere else he could go with the ball. Maybe the ball could have come out a tick earlier. I wonder if there's operational issues beyond just the accuracy. Like, I wonder if there's more to go into it to pull the plug this early. So, like, just from a 2024 perspective, I do understand it. You want to know you can get something from your passing game as opposed to the mostly nothing that they've gotten in a couple of games this year with Richardson. That's the short-term view of it. But in the short term, it does make sense they want to have a functional NFL passing game and not one from the 1970s, which is essentially what you had with Richardson. Low completions, high rate of explosives, hope that the good explosives outweigh the bad explosives.
Yeah, for the offense they're running right now, Joe Flacco is probably a significantly better fit. It's not what I've been arguing, but I was going on against something else that they laid out in the offseason, which was that they were going to use the Jalen Hurts playbook, that they were going to build this around that backfield of the running back they paid the 3rd highest salary to in the NFL with the most athletic quarterback prospect in NFL history. And they were going to use the run to set up some things. I guess it's always been in conflict with what Shane Steichen said when he got here, which is he's a throw-to-score, run-to-win coach, and that has gone on steroids this season. Their game scripts are so pass-heavy right now that if that's the world that they're going to live in right now, it's only built for a veteran quarterback to operate. And forget the dual threat part of this even. And I just think if you had another rookie sitting in this position, it's not really built for that because the roster isn't built that way. The roster is built to run the ball with an offensive line that's among the top 5 in the league, with tight ends who block, with running backs who don't catch the football. Right now they have a wide receiver 1 who told me on Sunday that he can barely bend over. Right now you need a high-level passer and pre-snap, veteran savvy player to be able to work through the blitzes that they're getting when there's not very many players that teams have to cover right now, and to be able to work through these issues with the personnel where, the connection with AD Mitchell hasn't been there. Like I said, Michael Pittman Jr. is banged up, and they don't have tight ends and running backs to throw to either. So that to me is, I guess, the biggest disappointment here is there was always a possibility, if not a probably high probability, that Anthony Richardson was not going to work from the start. As exciting as it was, it's most first-round quarterbacks bust, and especially his profile. It was a bet on all the upside, and but it may not work. I just wish we had seen the offense that they were supposed to run with him, with the quarterback run game, with leaning into Jonathan Taylor, with low volume passing. But anyway, if they're going to do this high volume pass heavy approach, get the ball out quickly to avoid sacks type of offense, then Joe Flacco does fit that a lot better. And that's kind of what I wrote out of the game, was that the offense they're running looks like it's built for Joe Flacco right now. Honestly, though, if that's factoring into why they made this decision, then what they're doing is they're choosing a playbook over the player. And that seems backward to me. I think there is more to it than that we'll get into as far as what it takes for Anthony Richardson to work through these issues. But yeah, back to the main point. In the short term, I could see it working where, Josh Downs is, he looked like he was really connecting well with Joe Flacco, who can hit him on more completions than Anthony did. for sure. You could see a situation where, they have Jonathan Taylor back, so they still can have a high-level run game even without Anthony Richardson, because Taylor is that kind of prolific player. In the short term, I do think there is a way for them to be pretty good right now. The way that Joe Flacco stepped in with the Browns and in the short term was pretty good, was able to pick it up quite quickly. But it's also flimsy, because I think one injury to Josh Downs or Jonathan Taylor, and a lot of this goes out the window. And also we have to see how they operate if they don't have Bernard Ryman on Sunday. Sunday will be a big test against Brian Flores, who's had 10 days to prepare his blitzes. Now it's a different quarterback he's going after. It's not as easy to rattle as a rookie who's struggling this way, but we will see quickly if they're able to handle this, because the first 2 games out of the gates are Vikings and Bills, and that's you're going to have to score a lot to beat those teams. So we will see if Joe Flacco's up to the task.
Yeah, I keep thinking that there's got to be some other stuff with the operation of the offense within the design. Like, I'd have to go back and look. Does Shane Steichen feel like there are reads he's missing short in an effort to go for the big ball? I'd have to go back and look at all of it to know for sure. I'm going to try to ask it. I don't think Shane's going to answer. Some of the other stuff, like cadence, I know that doesn't sound like a big deal. Quentin Nelson false starting 3 times. Maybe wonder a little bit about consistency of cadence. Cadence is actually a really big deal. For Colts fans, I think the best person to listen to is probably Peyton Manning on this. Manning, I've heard talk about it on the Manningcast a couple of times about how important it is to develop your cadence and have it be consistent, and your team know what's going on, but the other ones don't. I think the ultimate example, honestly, is Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers' cadence is a weapon, and he used it as a weapon for a very, very long time. Honestly, it might be like the only weapon he has left at this point in his career. But it's been a big weapon for him for a long time. So there's more that goes into the cadence than I think people realize. I don't know that for sure. That's me speculating. But Quentin Nelson false starting 3 times feels weird. Like, he's a veteran. He's been around. We haven't seen Quentin make those kinds of mistakes before.
Braden Smith has had some of those.
Yeah, it just makes me and just the fact that they're benching him. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just, I know the numbers are bad, but if you really are calling the offense and asking for him to throw downfield as much as he has on every play, then I think the benching is even less defensible than if there's other stuff going on that's maybe harder for us to see in terms of his decision-making and stuff like that. Because if he's just running your offense and it's not that successful because your offense is boom or bust, that's really on you. That's not on the guy that needs to. That doesn't mean you need to sit a guy down to help him learn it all. There just has to be more than that. Maybe there's not. Maybe I'm looking for something that's not there. But like, I just feel like if you're making this move and he's actually running your offense the way it's supposed to be run based on like your evaluations of his grades week in and week out, then I hate the benching. Then I dislike this benching even more.
I think the answer is probably between those two. There's certainly operational issues. Just little mistakes too. Like this week, the fumble where the ball hit Jonathan Taylor, when he's trying to do the exchange. Like there's stuff like that.
He dropped that snap last week against Miami. Remember, down in the red zone.
Well, so the moment I think too is that pick before the end of the first half. The way that they have explained that to us was when Jonathan Taylor got a 7-yard run on first down, and Shane Steichen was pushing them to go for it, go for the jugular, try and get a field goal drive. They throw the next play, and it's a risk of an interception, but it's an incompletion. Shane Steichen draws up another play. We don't know what the play was, but they said if they want to hit an explosive, if they saw a certain look, Anthony Richardson gets out there, says, we didn't get that look, so he audibled to a new play. Maybe they didn't like the audible he went to, which was a lot of hitches, which had they even hit that throw they were trying to make to Josh Downs, The drive's probably over anyway. So I don't know if they like that audible. They certainly, I can't imagine, like the fact that he threw the ball when he dropped back, saw zone coverage, and it wasn't open. Now, that doesn't mean that Joe Flacco, by the way, Joe Flacco's career, he has forced the ball in some moments when he shouldn't. But you would like to think situationally, 34 seconds left on the clock, that in that exact moment, most veterans are not going to do that. They're just going to dirt it. They'll throw it over their head. They'll punt the ball. I could see them wanting some of that. But still, I feel like, it's a separate conversation to this. They said they wanted him to work through that on the field and learn it on the field. Now they don't. But I know it's also one of these things where what I've noticed out of Shane Steichen is that he draws up so many plays for kind of the guys you aren't expecting to get the ball. So, that's literally how their season ended last year, was drawing up that play to Tyler Goodson. We've seen it work at times, the trick play to the pop pass to Mo Alley Cox last year. This year, though, you look on Sunday, there were a lot of plays like that, whether it was A.D. Mitchell down the sideline, whether it was throwing to Will Mallory. I don't know that these are all the first reads, but there's certain times when we know it is, like that throw to Goodson, the speed option to Trey Sermon. He's trying to work against the defensive structure where they are trying to take away your playmakers and make you play through somebody else. And Shane's saying, okay, what are the gaps in this defense? We're going to go for that. The problem with that approach is that there's always kind of an out to it when it doesn't work. If the defense covers it, we often hear it was good defense, credit the defense. If they try the play and it doesn't connect, if it is open and it doesn't connect, it's always easy to say, well, the execution was wrong. Gardner Minshew made a bad throw. Tyler Goodson didn't catch the ball. But sometimes you're putting something on players that aren't ready to do it either. And so that's happened sometimes when you're using the youngest starting quarterback in the NFL who has some accuracy ball placement issues. It's not going to be a lot of perfect passes. You're asking him to throw the ball, connect with A.D. Mitchell, who's even younger than he is, or throw to Will Mallory, who has barely played, or Tyler Goodson on that long wheel route. There's things that are going to be off a little bit. And so I do think
the other piece,
part of that you can quarterback and wanted to be better. And a veteran probably is better with some of that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. But the other thing about that is that's also in the front office.
Oh yeah.
Give Steichen better options.
Absolutely. That's kind of what I'm getting at here, is that if some of the players that Anthony was throwing to on Sunday, those plays early on when he looked to be playing pretty well, but there were either drops or something was off. If those are established tight ends, pass catching running backs, maybe a wide receiver, a rookie wide receiver, we know they tried to trade up for Malik Neighbors or a guy like that, or either Malik Neighbors or Brock Bowers. Maybe those guys are making those plays, and maybe Shane Steichen looks like an absolute genius for getting guys open, and now these players are making the plays, and it's not happening that way. And that's why I'm saying this whole thing is so disconnected right now, where Chris Ballard built a roster to run the ball. They drafted a dual threat quarterback, and their head coach wants to throw to score early in games and then use the run game to salt away victories. And right now, Joe Flacco fits that a lot better than Anthony Richardson does, which is some Anthony's fault because he's not playing as well as he could. But it's also asking a lot out of the type of quarterback they went after, who needed reps and experience, where accuracy is not his thing, to say, you're now a drop back pocket quarterback throwing to guys who aren't very good because the GM didn't go out and get you better options. It's all I just think, if you're looking for one person to blame for why we're in this situation, I think the problem is it's everyone. It's Anthony for not playing well enough. It's his coach for not designing an offense to use him to his skill set and put him in good situations. And it's on the GM for not building a roster that can help lift up this young quarterback when he isn't perfect. And so they're all kind of dragging each other down at the moment, and they're looking to Joe Flacco to, hey, come in and fill some of these gaps because we don't know how to do it.
I want to talk about another thing here that I think bears. Shane Steichen says it doesn't have any bearing on this decision, but I think we need to talk it through anyway. Anthony Richardson tapped out. Do you buy the idea that has nothing to do with this decision?
I don't think it has nothing to do with it. I don't think it's in the top 3 or 4 reasons. What I think it does is it adds one more layer of concern to the overall problem that they're having right now, which is in their eyes, it doesn't feel like Anthony Richardson is understanding the gravity of the moment, the role, the plays, the situations. It's all a little over his head. And that's part of it. That is one part of it, is being a teammate, being available, being a leader. That's one side of it. And that didn't help him build this argument that he's getting it enough to work through the struggles, and that actually playing is teaching him these lessons, where, he's doing that, in the 8th game of the year. That's something that, they need to drill in him better. And they don't feel like he's getting that at this moment. So I think it fits in that way. But I think if that doesn't, and the other thing too, is I think the main thing is that no doubt upset some guys in the locker room. We heard that from Ryan Kelly, who said Anthony Richardson did not live up to the standard we expect for him. There's no way Ryan's the only one who feels that way. So I think it gives them a window to make this change and not have the locker room completely despondent the way that they were 2 years ago when they did this with Matt Ryan. That was a pretty shell-shocked locker room. We'll know for sure when we get there tomorrow. But I think it is a way to say, look, we're going to move to the veteran who gets this thing on all these different levels, including that one, that Joe Flacco, I don't think he has ever taken himself out of a game for being tired, when he's not hurt. Just understanding that gravity of that role. So I think it helps smooth it over in that way. But if that had not happened, I kind of think I don't know. I think we're still probably in this spot. Maybe it waits another week. Maybe that played into the timing of it. But I've heard the same thing too, that they're headstrong that was not a factor. I think it's just playing into their emotions a little bit, playing into the timing a little bit. But I think really the main thing for them, whether we agree with it or not, is they don't think that playing and getting reps and learning on the field is working for Anthony Richardson. And they think sitting him down and having him not play and watch Joe Flacco could work for Anthony Richardson. I think that's the main thing. Because if it's about the tap out, then we should see him in a week, right? I mean, how long of a timeout does he get for that?
Yeah, well, and if it's about the tap out and you don't say it publicly and he's back in a week, then what are we doing here?
Yeah.
What are we doing here? You can't do that kind of stuff with starting quarterbacks. You can't even do that kind of stuff with starting quarterbacks at the collegiate level. You know what I mean? Like if a starting quarterback missed say Georgia's starting quarterback drove 150 miles an hour, just a hypothetical, not drawn from anything that's gone on there. And he didn't play the first quarter of the season opener or something, and then they put him in for the second quarter. Like, people would think it was ludicrous if they said, well, we just wanted to see what the backup was going to do, or something to the effect of that, instead of just saying it was a suspension. So if he's back in a week, like nothing ever happened, and it's like, well, we saw Joe and we decided it wasn't there, like that'll look even sillier than going back on your stated plan for Richardson right now. Like, I don't know. It's just.
Well, I guess what I'm asking that is, what do you think is the plan then? To just
well. So here's the thing. This is what I want to do with the future stuff part of the podcast. I'm going to lay out some scenarios, and I think this is going to illustrate something I'm about to say. I've said all along. I know a lot of people. I know a lot of other people have said this, but I've said all along, it's really hard to put the plug back in after you've pulled it on a starting quarterback that you drafted. And I'm basing that basically just on NFL history. Like, you just don't see teams do that. I have a suspicion that what happens to teams is, once you've gotten to the point in your head, like, if you've already started this player for a long time, and once you get to the point in this head that this player needs to come out, it's hard for you to go back to the point where you're emphasizing what they're doing well and not de-emphasizing what they do poorly, but not putting a ton of stock in it. You know what I mean? Because like there are great starting quarterbacks that are going to have bad games. Patrick Mahomes has 9 interceptions this year, right? Something like that. Like the Chiefs aren't going to bench him because it's Patrick Mahomes and they believe in Patrick Mahomes, and that's an extreme example, but that's what happens with starting quarterbacks. All starting quarterbacks have bad plays. Right. The ones that get benched are the ones that the teams don't feel like they have confidence in. I think what happens is once you've decided you don't have confidence in a player, it's really hard to get that back. Like our editor, Nat Newell, looked at every first-round quarterback since 2000. The only ones he could come up with were who were benched, came back from being benched, started for the same team, and had some success. And you can point this out in a second, but some success is really carrying a lot of weight there. Are Alex Smith and Rex Grossman. And both of those teams ultimately moved on from those guys. Like, neither of those guys ended up being the franchise quarterback for those teams. You know, so that it still feels like that was always in their mind. I think that's what happens is once you've gotten to that place where you're like, the negative is so negative, we have to get them out. It's hard to come back from that. So I've been saying that for a long time. The Colts are not going to say that on Wednesday. Shane Steichen's going to say something along the lines of, you know, this is temporary. We still believe in Anthony. It's just not working right now. So we're going to let him sit and do whatever. But the reality of the situation is that's just not how the NFL usually works.
Right.
And I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake to expect this place to be different than every other place in the NFL. Like all those other places in the NFL said they weren't giving up on people when they benched them. And then they traded Justin Fields in the offseason and drafted Caleb Williams, or Desmond Ritter's on his fourth team, or like I'm trying to think of other guys off the top of my head who were benched last year. But like, what happens to bench guys? They get benched. They're on a different team the next year.
Yeah. I guess here's my question then. Do you think that is what Shane's going to say? Do you think they, in their minds, think they're giving up on him? Or
no.
Right.
But the reality of the situation, and this is why I want to go through scenarios to illustrate how difficult this is for this to happen to come back, is like, I don't think that any team thinks that right away. I don't think any team, with the exception of like Johnny Manziel, where it's like very clear that this person doesn't do what they're supposed to in the NFL. I think that's an example of like once they bench him, they know. But I think most of these teams don't bench a player thinking, oh, I hate this guy. I don't want to ever see him play for me again. Or they would just cut it. You know what I mean? But what happens is this. So here, I'm going to throw out the first scenario. Say this works. Okay? Joe Flacco goes in. He beats the Vikings this week. We'll say he beats the Bills and the Jets. And like we're going best case scenario here. He beats the Bills. He beats the Jets. They lose to the Lions. They get on a run at the end of the year. They finish 11-6. They're in the playoffs. Well, how about we'll even throw this in? Houston falls off, and they don't just make it to the playoffs. They win the division. First time since 2014. Okay, and then they lose to say Kansas City in the second round. So we're even giving them a playoff win in this scenario. Okay, now we're in the offseason. What do you do in the offseason?
Bring Joe Flacco back.
You bring Joe Flacco back. So Ray Richardson sits another year, right? Or at least until Flacco gets hurt. And the longer he's not on the field, I mean, maybe it turns into a Jordan Love situation and it looks better. Like that's the best case scenario, right?
Well, but next year is Anthony's third season. So
that's I think that's the Jordan Love situation. I think Jordan Love's at 3 years, right?
Yeah. But like the difference is that when the Packers went to Jordan Love, I mean, they were hoping it was going to work out, but there was no evidence of it. But that was always the hope.
Yeah. And they also didn't start him before that. Like his only start was an injury thing.
And then that's what I'm saying is that he hadn't done anything to lose their faith yet. It was just kind of blind faith. The difference, I don't see a scenario where they're planning on Anthony being their starter without any competition, no doubt, in like a year and a half. Because that's not like he already lost that ability. I mean, that would be like, I don't know, that'd be shocking. So real quick here, I agree that they think that this is going to help Anthony get on track. And the reason that I say that, I mean, I've been told, I've heard that already, but those two examples you laid out of the only two times that our editor Nat could find when a first-round quarterback was benched, came back, the team had success. One of them was Alex Smith with the 49ers, which he did later have success with the 49ers for a brief bit, but it got the coach fired. Jim Harbaugh came in and made that work. So that's not the plan here. They're like, well, hopefully we'll just fire everybody and then he'll succeed with like new people. So the other one though, Rex Grossman, it leaves Rex Grossman as the last one where he was there, he got benched, came back. I would not say he played well, but he went to a Super Bowl, as Colts fans remember him in that Super Bowl. And the Bears were winning for a bit. Do you know who is the only other first-round quarterback that Chris Ballard has been around in any organization?
Is it Grossman?
It's Rex Grossman. So he was there in Chicago when they did this, and they benched Rex.
Was he around Alex Smith in Kansas City? I know he's a first-round quarterback before another team.
Yeah.
Right?
He was around Alex Smith. I'm saying being a part of a franchise that drafted a quarterback in the first round. He was there for Rex Grossman. Right. The next one was Anthony Richardson. The Bears decided it wasn't working with Rex Grossman at the time. He wasn't developing the way they wanted to, all that. They mentioned for a little while. They bring him back. They go to the Super Bowl. That's the model that they're trying to follow now with Anthony Richardson. There's a lot of reasons why I am skeptical of the comparison and why that would work that way. And here's the main one. Forget it. Maybe the same thing happens where he comes. Maybe that can happen again. But Rex Grossman didn't end up being the answer for the Chicago Bears. So that bet for Anthony Richardson to actually meet the expectation they had when they drafted him, which is to end the quarterback carousel, not for like 3 years, for like they wanted him to be the long-term guy. For him to come back from this and be the long-term guy, he'll have to do something that I don't think has ever been done in NFL history.
Yeah, and so like let's get back to scenarios.
All right, sorry for my side tangent.
No, it's good. Like the thing about it is we can go in and out of it, but like the more you think through this stuff, the more I think it's obvious why it becomes hard for teams to put people back in. So we've got the scenario where Flacco is awesome and the Colts are awesome and they do more than anybody thinks they can do. Like you said, you have to try to bring back Flacco at that point, right? Have to.
Oh yeah.
Locker room won't allow it. So
the Browns would have done it if they just weren't contractually tied to Deshaun Watson. The owner was forcing him on the field. Like if they had any opportunity to keep that going, they would have.
Okay, so now what about if it doesn't work out? Flacco loses a close game to the Vikings, throws 4 picks against the Bills. They stick with him. He beats the Jets. They lose to the Lions. They're 5-7. We'll say they go on a run and get to 9-8, miss the playoffs by a little bit. So he's okay. Flacco's okay down the stretch. Not like bad enough that you want to pull him and go back to Richardson, but he's not good and you miss the playoffs. Number one, I want to say this first of all. I think you have to make the playoffs if you do this.
Oh yeah,
you have to.
Have to.
It's playoffs or bust now.
Well,
there's no like
you stick with it, yes.
Yeah, there's no like we were developing him. You know, I think even if you don't stick with him, I think it's fair to say you blew it when you went to him and didn't get what you wanted. It's playoffs or bust for this team now. But say this is the scenario. They're 9-8. They miss it again just by a little bit, but they have some positives to go on. Richardson hasn't played the rest of the season. It's been Flacco the whole time. What's the offseason look like then?
I mean, I think there's a world where what they choose to do and say is that they're right in the Jordan Love scenario. Flacco gave us some time. Anthony learned. Back to Anthony.
But
you're doing
also,
that. Here's the thing: you're doing that. You're telling Anthony you get another chance because the last guy wasn't good enough to get to the playoffs and he's old. Like he didn't.
And
earn
also,
it. He just.
And also, like, again, the thing people keep bringing up with Jordan Love is, like, people keep bringing up Jordan Love to us. Jordan Love didn't start. You know?
Exactly.
That's what Jordan Love didn't start before that. So do you go into it thinking, now maybe you can go into it thinking, we're just going to give this back to Richardson in 2025. It didn't work out with Flacco. Oh, well. But isn't it also just as likely that you go into the offseason thinking, well, Flacco couldn't get us to the playoffs. Richardson wasn't good enough to be better than Flacco down the stretch. Shouldn't we look for somebody else? And then you're in a quarterback competition next year.
Yeah.
And quarterback competitions do not go well for the incumbent usually.
No. Well, that's the thing. So if they're in that scenario where they're 9-8, but they didn't make the playoffs, this team's been in that exact spot looking for a quarterback. This is the 2022 offseason again. You moved off the veteran. You went 9-8, but you didn't make the playoffs. You don't have a good enough draft pick to go and get one probably. Or maybe they do. I don't know. It's a different quarterback. That year had no quarterback options. Maybe they consider drafting one. Yeah, they're in purgatory. I mean, they're looking around like, is there a veteran we can get? Like what? You know, maybe they draft the guy and he's going to compete with Anthony Richardson, which, like you said, that doesn't go well for the incumbent. Maybe they do talk themselves into somehow this is their version of the Jordan Love thing, even though, like you said, there's a very clear difference. But maybe they say, hey, he learned a lot from Joe in those final half of a season. Now we think he's going to be ready. That's a big bet, though, because if that doesn't work, I mean, that's where it feels like you are betting your whole jobs on that, going right back to that. If that happens, you're saying that this year with Joe is different than last year with Gardner, because he has already said.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking yourself into some version of, well, last year he was hurt, so he couldn't even do the practices, and I don't know. It's either like we're showing here the flaws of this is that everything they said a quarterback needs to develop, they're now going to say the opposite.
Yeah.
If they're going to hold the belief that like this is still going to work with Anthony.
Now, what if it blows up in their face? What if they lose the next, 4 games? They lose the next 4 games. They drop to 4-8. They decide to go back to Richardson in one of these sort of yo-yoing things that teams do. And say Richardson still looks the way he does now. Where are you in the offseason?
I mean, if we're being real, I think we're going to be in that scenario. We're going to be pretty busy covering some hirings.
Yep.
I mean, how could you not? It would say that everything failed. The short term, the long term, it all failed. That's what that would be.
Realistically, the best case scenario for Anthony Richardson, unless, like you said, unless this is a situation that has never happened before in NFL history that we can think of, or at least in the last 2 decades, two and a half decades of NFL history. Unless it's a scenario like that, realistically, your best scenario for Anthony Richardson is that Joe Flacco gets hurt. And I'm not trying to say it's good that Joe Flacco gets hurt. I'm saying this is the best case scenario is that they win a couple games, Joe Flacco gets hurt, Anthony Richardson comes back and looks awesome.
Yeah.
Or looks good. But
that's probably the only realistic way, because the other way would be kind of like a hybrid of that scenario you laid out before. It doesn't work with Joe. They're not winning. They turn to Anthony because they realize it didn't work with Joe. Might as well go back to Anthony. And then he's awesome. But that's asking him to be awesome after you benched him and you're saying, all right, we'll throw you back out there because the other guy sucks and the team's bad. And now this team that's bad. And by the way, if they're 4-8, they're not going to have the same players around. Let me just tell you that. So he's going to come in with scrap heaps and suddenly do all the things he wasn't doing when he had better players because you hope those 4 games he sat behind the quarterback not playing well and losing games taught him something that he hadn't learned before. that is so unlikely to happen. So I think the one scenario that, look, none of this is likely at all. The only scenario I see that really is that I can see us coming back and being like, wow, holy crap, this actually kind of turned out is that one, the injury. They're in it. They're in the mix. They have to go back to him because of an injury. He steps in. He's awesome. They're able to say, look, he learned all these things. It's unfortunate that Joe got hurt, but here we are back to Anthony, and we're on, and we'll just always tell that story. That, again, though, can you think of that happening before? So what I will say is that a lot of the bet on Anthony Richardson was looking for a generational anomaly type of draft pick.
Right.
So
right.
They were in some ways already taking a bet that's like not been out there, but if you actually were to somehow hit it, the upside is crazy. This is kind of the latest wrinkle of it to me. But what's baffling to me is like they're taking something that was already going to be hard and making it so much harder and so much less likely to happen.
Well, and so you've said this. We were talking about this before the benching officially happened today. We were talking about this over text with our editor, and you were saying like Josh Allen's. Because here's the thing, they've essentially been hoping for the Josh Allen lightning.
Yeah,
like the pick was boom or bust. Most like the thing about boom or bust picks is that they're most likely to bust. They could boom, but the boom is Josh Allen because Josh Allen's first 10 games in the NFL were like really bad, right? We're talking. Well, do you have the numbers in front of you?
I've got the numbers here. It was just interesting as I looked it up how similar they were. So Josh Allen, like just to give a little refresher, very polarizing prospect coming out of college. He was at Wyoming. He had one good year and then a bad year there. People tantalizing tools, kind of not good college tape, and a lot of accuracy concerns. So the Bills draft him in the top 10. They turned him in like the second game, so he got on the field fast. But young player, his first 10 games, basically the same numbers as Anthony Richardson's first 10 games. Completion percentage was 52.1 for Allen, 50.2 for AR. Touchdowns, 6 for Josh Allen, 7 for Anthony. Picks, 9 for Josh Allen, 8 for Anthony. And the quarterback rating, 65.5 for Allen, 68.8 for Anthony. The team record, 4-6 for Josh Allen, 5-5 for Anthony Richardson. The Bills that first year, Josh Allen played most of his rookie year. Once they turned to him, they finished 6-10. So it was like the team didn't win, quarterback did not play well, but they're on the roller coaster of saying, look, it's a process. We're going to go into next year. And they rolled everyone back. Brian Daboll back as offense coordinator, same head coach. They said, we're going to build this. He will get better. And that's when we started to take off. The next year in 2019, he wasn't a star yet, but the accuracy went up like 7%, and they got to the playoffs. They lost a playoff game because he played poorly, but they got there. It was moving the right direction. To me, that's like they're right on that roller coaster here in Indianapolis where it started poorly. There's some really bad moments, but there were really bad moments for Josh Allen. The team's not winning as much as they want to. And to me, they're getting off the roller coaster right now, right as it's getting scariest. But like the ride was always going to get scary for it to have a chance to hit the thrill because that was the Josh Allen model. Now, why
we thought they knew that? We thought they knew that because they told us it was going to happen.
Yeah, that's the thing is they said all the things that the Bills said, but one of those stuck to their word and the other didn't. And I think there's some key reasons why one stuck to the words and the other didn't. One of them is that the play caller for Josh Allen, I can imagine being a play caller for Anthony Richardson is frustrating at times. It was frustrating in 2018 with Josh Allen that Brian Daboll was his offense coordinator. He did not have the power to make the quarterback decision. He's an offensive coordinator. They had a head coach, defensive head coach in Sean McDermott, who had much more power, and he was able to pull back and say, hey, let's not just live in the play sheet with this kid right now. Let's look at the long term, not what we're going to do on 3rd and 8. Colts aren't in that spot. The head coach is the play caller. The head coach making the decisions on who starts is the one reacting to what happens when our play call went disastrously wrong. I think the other big difference is that, again, I brought up how Chris Ballard, the GM, the one time he can go back to that they did with a first-round quarterback was Rex Grossman. Sit him down, Let him learn. Let's get back to it later. And it worked. Brandon Beane in Buffalo, he had done this one time before in a front office, and that was Cam Newton. A little different because Cam Newton, I mean, it wasn't like this bad with Josh Allen, but Cam Newton needed a little bit of development too. There was accuracy concerns, but a high upside.
Cam was much more successful. He threw for like 4,000 yards his rookie year.
Yeah. No, it's not the same in terms of the model, but I think what I'm saying is when the Bills drafted Josh Allen, the hope was at some point he could show things like Cam Newton did, but it wasn't going to happen right away. But they still had that vision in their mind of like, we're going to stick to it because we're shooting for the moon here with Cam Newton. And it kind of worked. I mean, you have to accept at some point with the spot that Brandon Beane was in and all of them were in, if it doesn't work, they're going to get fired. But they stayed on the roller coaster because I think Brandon Beane had seen what the thrill becomes with that kind of drafted position when you do tap into all those traits and you build a team that can tap into it and it all comes together and Cam Newton wins an MVP and takes the Panthers to the Super Bowl. He had seen that play out, that vision play out. Chris Ballard's never seen this play out before. Jim Irsay, frankly, has never seen this play out on this level, this kind of long quarterback development, can't pass at the start of your career for a while and then like later get into it. Now, Shane Steichen was supposed to be the one who had gone through this with young quarterbacks. He just hasn't seen it struggle to this level. And I think that's playing into this is that Shane's tune has changed from when he was the biggest one saying, you get better by playing. And this week was the first time before he made the benching decision of saying, well, it kind of goes both ways. Like there's some guys who benefit from sitting and some guys who benefit from playing. I think he started to reassess and say, look, one thing that worked for Jalen Hurts and Justin Herbert, who had a lot of experience in college coming in, it's not working right now for Anthony Richardson. Maybe we need a different way. But I think the disappointing thing here was I thought Shane Steichen was the one to is kind of supposed to keep these guys, keep this roller coaster on the tracks and say, look, let's work at it. Let's work through the issues. Let's play him. Let's get better by playing because Jalen Hurts did that. And I don't know. They had a shift though. They wanted off the roller coaster, and then they want their hope is to get back on it in a few games. But I don't know that's how roller coasters work. So
generally, you can't get back on the roller coaster until it stops. Generally, you can't get on it in mid-ride. That's not.
Well, generally, what happens is like if you could though, if you were on a roller coaster and you were so utterly terrified that you had a button that you could say stop this, and they stopped it, and someone got a ladder and they pulled you down, and you took a break and you like, you got a fan on you and you got some water in you. Are you getting back on that ride? That scared you so much you had to push the panic button and they had to break the ladder out and climb up there and stop the ride for an hour, and you almost like lost everything in your life?
I would not.
That's what's unrealistic about this. At what point are they willing to get back on the roller coaster that scares them so much right now that they're ripping apart the plan?
We've mentioned Josh Allen several times. We've mentioned so the guys. I think it's probably fair if someone says stop mentioning the one time it worked out. So I'll give you. I'm going to give people the alternate. The player who didn't work out. The best example of a player like Richardson who didn't work out is Trey Lance.
Yep.
1 year starting in college, lack of experience, not nearly as athletic as Richardson, but still athletic, like not the arm strength, but still like the Niners drafted him for like what he could be, basically. Same reason the Colts drafted Richardson. Lance started not very many games.
Well,
like 4 in the
that is why I think it's a lot different. Is that
they
decided based on practice they couldn't put Trey Lance out there. Yeah.
And the other thing is they had other options. They had other the other thing about Trey Lance is they didn't have to play him because it turned out that Brock Purdy was in a starting NFL quarterback with Mr. Irrelevant.
Yeah. And they had
I was just reading like something that said that apparently Kyle Shanahan went to Jed York during training camp the first year that Purdy was there and said, I think our third quarterback is actually our best quarterback. And that was one of the years that Lance was in the top 2. Like, I don't think Sam Ellinger's in that place. I just don't.
Well,
So that's the other piece of it. They had a better option to turn to who was also young.
Well, and it's also the way they framed it from the beginning. I don't remember them ever saying Trey Lance has got to be on the field. The only way to learn it is to play and get better. I mean, they had a pretty good roster. They wanted to win, and they were going to go to Trey Lance when they felt like he was ready and earned it.
Right, because Jimmy G was there, right?
Yeah, Jimmy Garoppolo was there. They were trying. See, this is the interesting thing. They were trying the Patrick Mahomes playbook, which was trade, like, you're a really good team. You're knocking on the doorstep of a Super Bowl, or you're in the playoffs every year, but you can't break through. Chiefs couldn't break through with Alex Smith. So they had like such a good roster. They knew they could make the playoffs if they spent their first round pick in another way. Chiefs put all their picks in, went up, got Patrick Mahomes, and they said, we're going to sit him and we'll go to him when we need to. Our team's good enough to make the playoffs. We'll make the switch they had the equity to do that. The 49ers were in the same spot. Now the problem is the big problem is, like, the big difference is when the Chiefs did that, it was for Mahomes. When the Niners made their trade up, they then were going to figure out who that quarterback was. And in that process ended up with a Trey Lance that they never trusted. But like, they were going to have him sit and learn behind Jimmy Garoppolo and at some point go to him. They just never felt like they could go to him. If the Colts had done that with Anthony Richardson, we'd be in a different spot. Because, who would you say in the NFL, what quarterback, if we take Josh Allen out of this, what other quarterback currently in the NFL was Anthony Richardson most comp to?
Newton? Oh, currently. Dang it.
Who does he compare himself to sometimes?
Lamar.
Lamar sat to start his rookie year. Do you know who he sat behind?
Joe Flacco.
And it worked out nicely, didn't it? They passed off. He got to learn behind Joe Flacco. It kind of feels like the Colts are trying to reverse engineer what the Ravens did. But the problem is Lamar Jackson came in and they said, you're not starting right away. We got Joe Flacco. You're going to need to learn all these things. All the things the Colts are going to tell us now that Anthony Richardson needs to do behind Joe Flacco. Key difference is the Colts put Anthony Richardson out there. He didn't play well. They benched him. They said, you're not playing well. We're going to Joe. And then they're going to hope that the same thing works. So it's kind of like, to me, it just feels like trying to get the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah, and the other piece of it is like, there's a big difference between Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes and Anthony Richardson and Trey Lance, is that Lamar Jackson played 38 games in college before he got to the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Mahomes, I'm trying to look it up right now, but he played at least 2 seasons as a starter in college. Trey Lance and Anthony Richardson did not. And so, like, that was the thing. They've been telling us all along, this guy needs to play because his big weakness is he hasn't played. That wasn't true for Mahomes or Jackson. Mahomes had 32 starts. So they both had 30-plus starts in college of playing football. These guys don't, which we've been told over and over again, and you've been told as a Colts fan who pays attention to this podcast, or a Colts fan who pays attention to what the Colts say, that if a guy hasn't played, what he needs is to play, right? Anthony Richardson still has not played as many games in college and the pros as either of the 2 guys that we just mentioned had played in college.
Mm-hmm. And see, that's why I have a hard time buying. You're probably right about there's operationally stuff that they're not happy with, but I don't buy that logic if the whole idea was he's got to play to learn that stuff, and he's going to learn it by playing. Unless you're at a point where you think he just isn't learning it and he can't learn it.
In which case, he's not coming back.
Yeah, in which case you're not going back to him. But if you're saying he just hasn't learned it, he needs to learn it. Well, you told us he was going to learn it on the field. So now this is where it feels like guessing. Well, that didn't work. How about we try this? Maybe this will work. And maybe it will. But it's not fitting the plan. And it does feel to me in its own way like Matt Ryan. They said he's going to be around here 2 years, 3 years. It lasted 8 games. How many games are we into this season? I mean, that's the other exciting right now. It's a short-sighted franchise at the moment. It just like
so have we talked? I can't remember if we've already brought this up, but one of the other things I've been saying is that not only yes, I know the rest of the NFL. What the Colts are going to say is they're going to say we don't care about the other examples in the rest of the NFL. This is what we're doing. We're going to bring him back. We're not giving up on him. All those other examples that you've heard of don't matter. Okay, you want examples from your regime? Jacoby Brissett signed to a 2-year deal. Gave up on him after one and went to Phillip Rivers. Brissett had to back him up. Carson Wentz, signed for multiple years. Terrible collapse at the end of 2021. Team couldn't stand the idea of him being back. Traded him away. Matt Ryan, like you just said, 3-3-1. There's 7 games. They benched him when they were still 500.
Oh, that's right.
And they gave up on a plan that was supposed to be 3, 4, 5 years. You can say he's going to have another chance. The history of this regime is that that's not true. The history of this regime that we're talking about is that when they give up on a quarterback, they give up all the way. Or at the very least, they're looking for other better options in the offseason.
And what's scary about that is if they go into next year and they keep the same people, and at some point they draft another quarterback, they're going to say the same things again, and we're going to have to sit here and say their actions say otherwise. Like, I don't know how you can promise another young quarterback we're going to be patient, we're going to stick with it, when this is what you did after 10 games, the last one.
Now, here's the one other thing about those 3 examples I gave. All the right decision. Like, Jacoby Brissett has never been like a starting caliber NFL quarterback after that. Carson Wentz was bad with the Commanders and now the Chiefs backup. Matt Ryan retired.
Right.
They're not benching Anthony Richardson now because he's playing well. And there's a bunch of stuff to go on. Mm-hmm. Like, somebody responded to me saying that the other day with, well, all those guys were bad. They're not benching Anthony Richardson because he's good right now. What they've seen from Anthony Richardson is worse than, honestly, any of the 3 quarterbacks I mentioned, maybe including Matt Ryan, from a passing standpoint. They've got to see where are they going to see it to get the confidence back so that when they get to the offseason, they're not looking somewhere else.
And not doing their due diligence. And this is the troubling thing to me. This might be the 4th example where they're right about the player isn't good and he's not going to end up being good after this. Well, that's not what they're thinking right now, but they may be how it goes. We may look back at this and be like, yeah, that was it was a bad pick and he didn't have success elsewhere. So maybe you talk yourself into this was never going to work. My thing is, like, don't you want to find that out though? For sure. Like, don't you want to play in Chris Ballard's words, if it gets you fired, so be it. But stay on the roller coaster and see if it becomes Josh Allen or it busts. Also, don't you want to see it in the offense that he's supposed to run? Like, why not go to the quarterback run heavy offense that's going to suit Anthony Richardson well, maybe to the detriment of the team. I don't know. I don't understand how it would be worse than how they played offense with him in the other format, but maybe they could lean more into the development of him to the detriment of the team. But then you would have a better evaluation of him. Like, if you put him in the offense that you think that Shade is a brilliant in designs, he designed it for Jalen Hurts, and it worked for Jalen Hurts. If you put him in that spot and then he fails, then I think you have a way of saying, look, we made the right bet on the coach and the system. The player didn't work in it. But if this is the last we see of Anthony Richardson, I'm just going to always look back on this and say they never even tried the Jalen Hurts offense. They put him in Joe Flacco's offense. He couldn't run Joe Flacco's offense, so they went to Joe Flacco. And that's confusing to me.
There's one other thing we need to talk about before we go. I think we need to bring it up. For years, Chris Ballard has said if he uses a high draft pick on a quarterback and it doesn't work out, he won't be given a chance to draft another one. they're not spinning this as it hasn't worked out yet.
Right.
But it ain't going well. So
I think I think Shane's tied to this too, because of what we've laid out before, that like you don't want to hire GM to work with a coach, especially if it's like a coach and a quarterback who failed. So they're kind of tied in this together. I think they both need one of two of the scenarios we laid out to happen for them, for this to have a chance to work out. One of them is either they hit that absolute ceiling with Joe Flacco and they win their first division title and playoff game in 10 years. And maybe that saves it through failing this way, because team success did save John Lynch from failing with Trey Lance. I mean, that was a historic flop. But the Niners win, they got to the Super Bowl, and they got to just kind of move on, and Purdy ended up working.
Yeah.
So that scenario could save them. The other thing they need to have happen, if it's not that, is that when we laid out of Anthony Richardson steps in for an injury before too long, plays really, really well, and then they can say that this worked, to sit him down for a couple weeks, worked, step back in, he learned all these lessons, and boom, he's awesome now. And they got Anthony Richardson right. But ultimately, the only realistic one to me is, I don't even know if it's that though. Anthony Richardson has to come back and work. Because to be honest with you, I don't really buy that first scenario with Joe Flacco. And you know why? Because for them to win a division title in a playoff game with Joe Flacco in this moment, he has to surpass what he did last year as the NFL Comeback Player of the Year in his best season in 6 years. Shane Steichen has to outcoach the two-time Coach of the Year in Kevin Stefanski, because it didn't work for them. I mean, they won 11 games, but Joe Flacco last year stepped in with a Browns team that was 7-3 at the time with the #1 defense. And he went 4-1, and it was a great story, and it won him NFL Comeback Player of the Year. They got a wild card spot. They went on the road against the Texans, and they got housed, partly because their defense fell apart, but Joe Flacco threw a pick six, and that was that. That was like the end of that magical run. They have to do better than that for this to work that way, especially when, here's an interesting thing. Look at how Joe Flacco thrived last year in that span with the Browns. He mostly, in those, he got 4. Amari Cooper missed one of those games, but in the 4 games he played, he had 485 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is a season-long pace of 2,000 yards to his #1 Pro Bowl outside wide receiver. The guy who would be that in this scenario is Michael Pittman Jr., who told me the other day he can barely bend over. The other #2 receiver he had in Cleveland had a great ascension with Joe Flacco, went to his first Pro Bowl, was David Njoku. Do they have one of those at tight end on this team?
No.
No, that doesn't mean that, like, those just happen to be their top playmakers. So that doesn't mean that, like, Josh Downs can't be good, or, you know, Alec Pierce has some plays. Jonathan Taylor helps. It's not like Joe Flacco he didn't have Nick Chubb to hand off to. So there are ways for, like, the offense to still succeed. But I'm just saying, like, for Joe Flacco to surpass his best season in like a decade, now that he's going to turn 40 years old, he's going to need to play even better without a #1 wide receiver who's healthy. And Shane Steichen's going to have to outcoach the 2-time Coach of the Year in Kevin Stefanski, who, by the way, has done this with every quarterback basically who's not Deshaun Watson. So it's not impossible, but that is quite a bet.
Yeah.
And honestly, you know what I think is a big risk here is in that scenario we talked about where Anthony Richardson does come back. We'll see if Michael Pittman Jr. is still playing or if he's on injured reserve. You know?
Yeah, I want to say something real quick. There's an analyst who wrote a string of tweets about the in defense of Richardson's game against the Texans, and about 5 of them in a row were do this 11. Like, you gotta say he's playing through an injury that almost put him on injured reserve. You have to.
You have to.
You gotta give You have to give the context.
Yeah, and to give some context.
It's not fair to Pittman. It's just not fair.
And by the way, the comment I just made, he might be on injured reserve. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom about it. I'm saying he should be on injured reserve now. He's playing through this because they have something to play for. And we'll see how long that lasts, but he's playing through it. And there's a couple of moments in there. Obviously, the Titans touchdown was awesome. Had a couple plays against the Dolphins, but he said he's got to rework. He told me after the game he's not playing well at all. He's got to be better in some way. And I asked, how do you do that? And he talked about they've got to come up with a new rehab practice plan because he cannot use his back the way he needs to right now. So that's why those plays look that way. Like you just said, it's not fair to Pittman to point that out. That's why those aren't happening with the number one wide receiver. And it feels like I don't know what gets it better. Like, we'll see if he can come up with a new practice rehab plan. But their bye week is week 14, and they are more or less laying out that he's going to go through this gutting pain and play at a reduced level for as long as he can, for as long as they're in it. But if they go back to Anthony Richardson because they go to 4-8, that's not going to be the scenario where he's in it. So now you're going to ask Anthony Richardson to thrive without his number one receiver when they also don't have tight ends and running backs to throw to either. So they're just not giving them a lot of options and avenues as we lay out these scenarios. There's not a lot of ways that this is gonna work, and maybe it wouldn't anyway. I'm not saying that they were looking at a scenario where like they're messing up something great. Obviously, like you said, they're benching because it's not going well. But to me, they're on the roller coaster at a scary moment, and I don't know. I still think the best chance that they all have of keeping their jobs and finding a long-term quarterback was to stay on that roller coaster and just see where it goes. And by the way, little thing I'll throw in there, if they actually would move to that run-heavy offense, they could play Ashton Dulin in place of Michael Pittman Jr. I don't know why he's playing 95% of snaps with this back injury. I don't think that's making it better. But they're doing it because they want to drop back 37 times and they need their number one wide receiver. So it's a lot of things backward at the moment.
There's also a piece of this where all the scenarios laid out, you still don't know about Anthony Richardson. If you stick with him, if you had stuck with him, if you hadn't benched him, if you'd stuck with him for the rest of the season, and he was this bad the rest of the season, I think you might have your answer at that point.
Mm-hmm.
If he had never gotten better, you might have your answer on him then and there. Like, okay, it's time to move on. And maybe that means probably means all the organizational change that we mentioned based on what's been said about, developing a quarterback and all that stuff. But at least you'd have your answer. Tabling it doesn't do any of that. It just leaves you getting into the third off season. Well, heading into his third season, still having no idea whether or not he can make this leap, this extremely improbable leap you were hoping he would make when you drafted him. Like, at least you'd get answers. You're not going to get answers if Joe Flacco starts the rest of the season.
Yeah, Kevin O'Connell said this recently, and the Colts will play the Vikings this week, but he said that his belief is that franchises fail young quarterbacks more than the reverse. And that's what this has felt like so far. And maybe they're both failing each other, but you just can't tell me that the Colts are nailing the evaluation, that they've gotten it by the process. They have not followed the process they laid out. And we see this sometimes where, you look back at Sam Darnold with the Jets. Was there enough infrastructure for him to know for sure he's the problem and he's dragging the team down? No. And it turns out that actually he was pretty good. But they didn't know that. They didn't really get that evaluation based on the situation they put him in at the time. And so that's unfortunately where I think this is starting to look is. And here's other examples that looking back, it certainly doesn't look like wise business for the Titans to go out and sign DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley and then be bad. But you know what they did? They set it up so there's no excuses for Will Levis. They will know this year whether Will Levis works or not because they gave him 2 Pro Bowl wide receivers. There's not they gave him the thing to succeed with, and he hasn't succeeded with it. So if they end up moving on from Will Levis, it's going to be because they gave a proper evaluation and they found their answer. And I don't think the Colts have done that. And they're going to tell us they haven't done that. They're going to tell us this week, we still believe in him. We haven't seen enough to say that he's failed. And that's the problem. You needed to play him until he gave you that answer. And that's what they all told us they were going to do. And that's the one thing they didn't do.
Yeah. Anthony Richardson might never be a good NFL quarterback. We're not saying he is right now. We're not saying he will be. We're not saying any of that. And he's been bad. Yep. He has been bad. But the reason so many people are like, why are they doing this? Is because they told us he was going to be bad, and they told us he was going to stick. They told us they were going to stick with him through him being bad to see if he could get to the other side.
And the other thing I'll throw in there is that if the argument for going away from that right now is this team can get to the playoffs, we owe it to our team to play the best quarterback so we can win games and have a chance. Maybe that should have been the approach in the offseason when they didn't sign a single veteran starter. They didn't set this year up to be a year where they won games. If they'd done that, I think this would be a little bit more defensible, where they say, you know what? We can't only make this about the quarterback development. This team's got a real shot at something. We need the veteran who can lead us to the playoffs, which, by the way, is what the Steelers are doing. And it's working. I didn't know it would with Russell Wilson, but so far it is. But they are trying as hard as they can in Pittsburgh to contend with a team that has recently contended, and they're going with the veteran who they think gives them the best shot, even though it probably costs them a chance at finding the long-term quarterback. But that's what they feel like they owe to all these players because they are trying to win right now. Like, this is the problem with us. That scenario laid out about like they win 11 games, they win division, all that stuff. Maybe that would have been possible if they went out and they signed defensive backs, signed a backup running back, found tight ends. Like if they had invested in this team and built it to be a playoff team, and they felt like this young quarterback is just dragging us down too much, I think that'd be a more defensible reason. Even though I think it's short-sighted, and but like that's ultimately what the 49ers did when they aborted the Trey Lance thing. Was we got a team that can still contend and knock on the door of the Super Bowl, or get to the Super Bowl. They're playing the best quarterback because they felt like they owed it to that team. They were good enough to win with it. That isn't how they set the season up to be. So to get there now is like, again, you're flipping this whole thing on its head. And it's just weird to me when Shane Steichen and Jim Bob Cooter, when we asked about, do you play a quarterback? Do you sit him? They said those are off-season conversations. So why are we doing it at midseason?
Yeah. And if you didn't want the project, you shouldn't have picked him.
Yeah.
You should have traded up for a more polished prospect.
That's the interesting thing that we have.
Turns out there was only one of those in the draft, but you could have traded up for him.
You could have traded up to number 1 for him. It's an interesting thing to look back on, and this is going to be, probably not a fun part for Colts fans to listen to, but like C.J. Stroud at the time, I remember watching him. I watched a lot of him at Ohio State, and then in the draft prospect, went to the pro day and all that. My comp for him was Justin Herbert. I saw a lot of Justin Herbert in his game. And we saw what Shane Steichen did with Justin Herbert. And the offense that Shane's running, this, shotgun, drop back, nail from the pocket, throw to score, and then run with Jonathan Taylor to win, that's set up for a player like C.J. Stroud. If the issues are operational, C.J. Stroud was the answer because he did all that at Ohio State. He certainly proved he was operational. The questions with C.J. Stroud were like, what's the ultimate upside? Is he enough of an athlete? But the readiness, the accuracy, the things that they're going to tell us that Joe Flacco offers them right now, we're all there in C.J. Stroud. They had to trade up to number 1 to do it. Now, I will say the problematic thing there is I think they would have had to give up Michael Pittman to do it. And one of the things that sunk Bryce Young in Carolina was when you trade your number 1 outside wide receiver and then try and go with rookie quarterback. So there was risk there. Maybe CJ's good enough to work through it. It's just something to look back on. And it is true. It's like the main thing I'm saying, though, is like all along, we go back to that draft. It was you're going to pick one route and you're going to have to create a model and stick to it. And if it doesn't work, that was the bet you were going to have to take. And felt like all of this, between whether they're trying to win now or not, whether they're trying to develop the quarterback by playing or not, it seems like they're kind of making it up as they go along. And that's why things seem wishy-washy.
Well,
we haven't even broken down the upcoming matchup. That's normally what we do in the podcast.
Don't need to. If we do that, it'll be on Thursday. We're not going to have time to do a Wednesday podcast. There's just no way. My fingers might fall off tomorrow. This is my advice to Colts fans. Live for today. because your tomorrow is not promised, and it's sitting, and any potential tomorrow you had will be sitting on the bench for the next couple of games. So, or at least the next game. So,
yeah, I mean,
live for today, throw it all in on this season, hope for a playoff berth, because clearly that's what your franchise wants. They want the playoff berth. Damn the torpedoes. Damn the long-term implications.
And to kind of play off those same notes with this franchise, you do need to live in the moment. And in the words of a wise man, if I die tonight and you're out of the league tomorrow, no one's going to know. The league rolls on, so let's live for today.
I don't think I can come back from that.
Is there any coming back from any of this? That's the great question, too. So
I can come back from that.
We'll see where we end up.
That's going to be the end of the Colts Cover-2 podcast.
If you can't sleep tonight, please direct all emails to Nate.